No, we don't need you. The room was silent in the way only powerful rooms ever were. Not peaceful. Not calm. But absolute. So complete it felt as if even the walls had learned not to breathe. The office belonged to the Vampire Syndicate's legal counsel, perched high above the river that cut through the city like a silver blade. The blinds were half closed, letting in a pale, indifferent light that flattened everything it touched. Power did not need brightness. It preferred shadows. King Adrian Valkyrin sat upright in his chair, hands folded neatly before him, his expression unreadable. He wore the same face he had worn during wars, territorial negotiations, and executions carried out with a single nod. Cold, controlled, eternal. Across from him sat Valentina. She had not cried. Not once. Her face was calm, but it was not the calm of strength. It was the calm that came from exhaustion, the kind that settled into a person after surviving too much alone. She wore a loose coat despite the warm afternoon, her hands resting lightly in her lap. No one in the room noticed the subtle way her body curved inward, protective. No one except her. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the final terms. Words like agreement, separation, and assets floated through the air, formal, hollow, bloodless. Adrian listened only enough to confirm that nothing threatened his control. The bond was ending quietly. No scandal. No conflict. Clean. Efficient. Exactly how he preferred things to end. He did not look at her as the papers slid across the table. When the pen reached his hand, he signed without hesitation. His name flowed smoothly, practiced, effortless. To him, signatures were no longer promises, just marks that confirmed something had finished. Valentina watched him as he signed. There was no anger in her eyes. No accusation. Only a deep, settled resolve that had taken months to build. She had already cried for this moment. She had already mourned it. What she felt now was not pain. It was certainty. When the pen reached her, she took it slowly. For a brief second, her fingers trembled, not from doubt, but from what she carried and what she had chosen to protect. She signed carefully as if each letter mattered more than the marriage itself. The lawyer smiled politely and began gathering the documents, explaining timelines and formalities. Adrian nodded once, already mentally moving on to the next meeting. Power did not wait. Survival did not pause for feelings. Then Valentina spoke. Her voice was calm, not sharp, not broken, just firm enough to cut through the room like a blade sliding between ribs. We don't need you. The words were soft. But they landed. Adrian finally looked at her. For a moment he thought he had misheard. There was no drama in her tone. No bitterness. No attempt to wound. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement. We don't need you, she repeated, more to herself than to him. Her eyes were darker than he remembered. There was something in them he could not identify, something old, cautious, unyielding. You don't need me? He echoed. No, she said calmly. We don't. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something private had entered the room. Adrian did not notice. His mind reduced her words to their simplest meaning. She was rejecting him. In his world, need was currency. Dependence was influence. To say she didn't need him was to declare independence from everything he represented. His protection, his name, his power. Fine, he said after a moment, his voice steady. If that's what you want. It is, she answered without hesitation. There was no pause. No last plea. No turning back. She stood, adjusting her coat with deliberate movements. For a fraction of a second, Adrian thought she might say more. Explain, soften the blow. She walked past him toward the door. At the handle, she paused just long enough to inhale deeply. It wasn't a sigh. It was the breath of someone who had already decided to survive whatever came next. Adrian remained seated. He told himself this was how chapters closed. Quietly, efficiently, controlled. He told himself she was proud, stubborn, determined to prove she could exist without him. He told himself she would be fine. People always were once they left his world. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Only then did the silence change. Somewhere beyond that door, Valentina placed a hand over her stomach as she stepped into the sunlight. She did not look back. She had already said everything that mattered. Inside the office, Adrian stood, straightened his jacket, and prepared to return to his empire. He believed her words meant what they seemed to mean. He did not yet understand that when she said we, she was not speaking only for herself. And he had no idea what she had already done. Adrian returned to his world the way he always did, without hesitation, without reflection, without leaving traces. The car waited below, the driver silent. The city moved around him like a living thing that knew his name and parted to let him pass. He leaned back in the seat, eyes forward, his mind already shifting from what had ended to what still needed controlling. Power did not stop for endings. The syndicate headquarters rose from the street like a sealed promise of steel, glass, and shadow. Conversations died as he passed. Doors opened without questions. Respect followed him like a shadow. This was the world where emotion had no value. Where hesitation was weakness. Where memory was dangerous. Adrian had built this empire with precision, discipline, and sacrifice. He had learned early that survival meant never looking back for too long. Meetings blurred together, territorial disputes, blood supply routes, numbers that represented lives reduced to margins and risk assessments. His voice was calm. His orders exact. No one saw cracks. They never did. That was the rule. The past stayed buried because buried things could not be used against you. That's what he told himself. Each time Valentina's image tried to surface uninvited, he refused to speak her name. Names had weight. He would not give her space inside his mind. She had chosen distance. Chosen independence. Chosen to walk away from his protection. And he had accepted her words as spoken. We don't need you. By nightfall he returned to his penthouse. Glass, shadow, silence. The woman waiting for him there, Mariana, smiled easily. She touched his arm, laughed at the right moments, fit the image perfectly. She asked for nothing he couldn't give quickly. You like that? She represented a future without noise, without demands, without vulnerability. Yet when the city quieted and the lights dimmed, something restless crept into the silence. Control felt thinner than usual. He poured another drink and told himself it was just adaptation. Loss always left a temporary echo. What he did not know was that Valentina was not adapting. She was preparing. And while Adrian believed that chapter was closed, the truth was already moving toward him. Patient, silent, inevitable. The king sees what he abandoned. Adrian Valkyrin entered the restaurant the way he entered all spaces that belonged to his world, with measured steps and an expression that discouraged questions. The effect was immediate. Chairs straightened. Conversations softened. Eyes followed him, not with admiration, but with recognition. This place existed within his territory, even if no one ever said it aloud. Crystal chandeliers burned softly overhead, reflecting off polished surfaces and expensive glassware. The scent of rare blood wine and discipline lingered in the air. This was not merely a restaurant. It was neutral ground, where agreements were whispered behind smiles and violence never crossed the table. He took a seat where he could see everything. Old habit. Old instinct. Mariana spoke beside him in a light, pleasant voice, filling the silence with harmless observations. He responded at the right moments, but his attention moved elsewhere, scanning exits, reflections, movement. Then time shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough to be wrong. Across the room between tightly packed tables, a waitress moved with careful steps. Her posture was familiar, too familiar. Slower than memory allowed. As she turned slightly, the world narrowed, his breath stalled, and something sharp pressed into his chest. It was Valentina. There was no confusion. No doubt. Even in a simple uniform, even with her hair pulled back into a modest tie, even surrounded by strangers, he recognized her instantly. Recognition struck him like a blade turned inward, deep enough to hurt, not sharp enough to bleed. She carried a tray with practiced balance, one hand steady, the other unconsciously hovering near her body. And then he saw it. The curve. Rounded. Heavy. Impossible to ignore. Her belly. 8 months. Maybe more. The room did not stop. Music continued. Laughter flowed. Plates clinked. But inside Adrian, something fractured. He watched as she served a table, smiling politely at a guest's comment before turning away. The pregnancy was undeniable. His mind raced backward, weeks, months, memories, searching for gaps, explanations, anything that made sense. Nothing did. His first instinct was not anger. It was fear. In his world, pregnancy was not just life. It was vulnerability. And vulnerability was dangerous. Mariana touched his hand and asked a question. He did not hear her. His gaze never left Valentina. She did not look at him once. Not even accidentally. It was as if she had trained herself not to see him. A deliberate blindness. And that unsettled him more than the pregnancy itself. She had learned to exist beyond his shadow. A server passed too close to her, brushing her shoulder. Adrian's jaw tightened. His instincts evaluated threats automatically, something he had not done for her in months. When he let her walk away from his world, he had believed distance meant freedom. Now he understood distance meant exposure. Her words from the lawyer's office returned with new weight. "We don't need you." Suddenly they no longer sounded like pride. They sounded like preparation. He stayed seated, forcing himself into stillness while every instinct screamed to move. Power had taught him patience. Patience had kept him alive. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. The question was no longer whether he belonged in her life. It was whether he had ever truly understood who she was protecting. Valentina passed near his table. Adrian did not move. He watched the way she held her shoulders straight, the way she shifted her weight carefully, the way each movement seemed calculated to protect the life she carried. This was not coincidence. It was survival. The restaurant noise blurred. Numbers and timelines filled his mind without invitation. The last weeks of their marriage replayed. His absences, his silences, his excuses about danger and control. None of it explained this. Understanding arrived slowly and without mercy. The child could only be his. And that meant she had left knowing it. Silence had been her choice. And silence terrified him more than rage ever could. In his world, people demanded things. They made noise. Silence meant strategy. Protection. Decisions already made. Now he understood. When she said "we don't need you," she wasn't rejecting him. She was drawing a line. Mariana spoke again, louder this time. He turned to her, nodded, offered a practiced half-smile, and spoke empty words she accepted without question. Everyone always believed him. But his attention snapped back to Valentina just as she paused near the kitchen door, pressing a hand briefly to her side to steady herself. Fear sharpened inside him. This place was his. Which meant enemies had passed through it. Deals had been made here. People had been watched here. And she was standing in the middle of all of it. Invisible. Unprotected. A server brushed past her again, too close. Something dark stirred beneath Adrian's composure. He reminded himself she had chosen this. She had said she didn't need him. And he had respected that. But the woman he saw now did not look independent. She looked determined. And guilt arrived, heavy, unavoidable, not because she struggled but because she never once asked him to stop her from struggling, and he had taken that silence as permission to disappear. When Valentina vanished through the side door, Adrian's chest tightened. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. The space she left behind felt larger than the room itself. For the first time, certainty cracked and questions emerged. What had she known that day in the office? Why had she believed his world was more dangerous than her solitude? And why had she been so certain when she said "we"? Adrian did not follow immediately. He waited until suspicion faded and the room regained rhythm. He paid, stood, and stepped into the cooler night air alone. Behind the restaurant, the alley was narrow and quiet, lights dim, nowhere to hide. Valentina stood there, adjusting her coat, one hand protectively over her stomach. Her shoulders tensed before he spoke, as if she had felt him arrive. "Valentina," he said softly. She turned. No surprise. No fear. Only tired awareness. "I knew you would come," she said calmly. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't a plea. It was a boundary. "I saw you," he said. "Inside." "You weren't meant to," she replied. "You didn't tell me," he said quietly. "I told you enough. You had no right." She laughed softly, not cruelly, just with disbelief. "You had rights when you listened. When you stayed. When you chose me instead of your empire." He stepped forward. She did not move back, but the space between them remained deliberate. "Is it mine?" he asked. The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She looked at the streetlights, the road she walked alone every night. Then she nodded once. "Yes. But don't mistake that for an invitation." He exhaled slowly. "I can protect you." "No," she said immediately. "I'm protecting him." That was when Adrian understood. The most powerful decision had already been made. And it had been made without him. Protection without permission. Adrian Valkyrin did not sleep that night. The city moved beneath his windows, alive with sound and motion, but he remained seated in the dark, replaying her words until they lost sound and became weight. The truth had not arrived like a blow. It had arrived like certainty, slow, inescapable, impossible to outrun. For centuries, Adrian had believed danger came from rivals, betrayal, weakness. He had never considered that the greatest risk would be something he had helped create and failed to protect. He saw her again in the alley. Her posture steady. Her voice calm. No accusation. No plea. She had not asked him for anything. Because she believed his world was not a gift. It was a threat. That understanding unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. Before dawn he made no calls, issued no orders. For the first time in years, he allowed the vast machinery of his syndicate to operate without his hand guiding it. The silence that followed felt unnatural. He poured a drink but did not touch it, watching the dark liquid reflect his face, older than he remembered, harder, less certain. Now he understood. "We don't need you" had never been rejection. It had been survival. And survival in his world demanded rules that innocence could not afford. By morning he made a decision, not one involving threats or negotiations but one requiring restraint. He did not go to her. He did not send money, guards, or messages. He did nothing that would announce his presence. Instead he watched. From a distance. He learned her routines. The streets she walked. The hours she worked. The places she rested. Protection was placed where it could never be traced back to him. Eyes were stationed where no one would ever notice them. He did not cross her boundary. But he refused to leave her exposed. Days passed. Then weeks. The waiting hollowed him out more than violence ever had. Every instinct he possessed demanded control, direct action, elimination of uncertainty. But this situation demanded the opposite. Stillness. Trust. Faith in a woman who had already proven she could survive without him. He watched the way her movements slowed as her pregnancy progressed. The way her hand lingered more often over her stomach. The way exhaustion settled into her shoulders. And the guilt deepened, not because she struggled but because she never once looked for him. One evening something shifted. She left work early. Adrian noticed immediately. The way she paused on the steps. The brief catch in her breath. The way she steadied herself before moving again. Fear sharpened inside him. He did not intervene. But he adjusted everything. Routes were changed. Doors reassigned. Surveillance tightened. Threats dissolved before they could form. That night, he finally understood what she had done when she walked out of that office months ago. She had not abandoned him. She had taken on the role he had failed to fulfill. Protector. Decision maker. Jill. And the realization humbled him in a way no lost territory ever could. His power, he learned, was not something to use. It was something to earn. The days that followed taught him a new discipline, one that did not seek recognition. He moved through his world with the same authority, but inside, everything had changed. Decisions were filtered not through dominance, but through reduction of risk to something fragile and unseen. Men were removed quietly. Suppliers vanished without explanation. Watchful eyes appeared where danger might bloom. No one asked why. They obeyed. But for the first time, Adrian used his control to create absence instead of presence. Danger erased itself before it could touch her life. Valentina continued as if nothing had changed. She worked long hours. Endured the stares, the whispers, the comments from customers who noticed her pregnancy and judged her without knowing her story. One night, a manager scolded her publicly for moving too slowly. His voice sharp. Humiliating. The room went quiet. Valentina lowered her head, apologized, and continued working. She did not cry. But the man was gone by morning. Transferred. Blacklisted. Disappeared from every establishment connected to the syndicate. No spectacle. No explanation. Justice quiet and absolute. She noticed small things afterward. The stairwell light in her building was fixed without her requesting it. A security guard appeared during her late walks. Her medical appointment was moved forward without reason. She didn't thank anyone. She didn't ask questions. But her eyes narrowed just slightly. Adrian felt it. She knew. The boundary she had drawn was being tested, not by intrusion but by consistency. And consistency was dangerous, because it invited trust. He considered speaking to her again. Standing before her and explaining everything, the protection, the precautions, the restraint. But words were easy. Presence was not. He knew that if he crossed her line now, even with good intentions, he would confirm every fear she had ever had about him. So he waited. Waiting became his penance. Then danger came too close. A car lingered outside the restaurant one evening. Plates clean. Timing wrong. Adrian acted without hesitation, but without exposure. Traffic shifted. Access points closed. The car was gone before it could matter. Valentina never knew. But that night, Adrian understood something he had always ignored. Love in his world was never neutral. It always carried consequences. And he finally understood why she had chosen certainty over hope. What power must kneel for? The night Valentina went into labor, the city was unremarkable. Traffic moved. Neon lights hummed. People hurried past one another, unaware that something fragile and irrevocable was about to enter the world. Adrian felt it before he was told. Not through reports. Not through surveillance. Through instinct. A sharp pull in his chest. A sudden, unshakable certainty. He stood from his chair without explanation and left the meeting mid-sentence. No one stopped him. No one questioned it. When a vampire king moved with urgency, the world learned to step aside. Valentina had insisted on a public hospital. No favors. No private wings. No names. When the call came, filtered, indirect, stripped of identifiers, it carried only one truth. She was in danger. The labor was early. Complications. Stress had taken its toll. Adrian arrived not as a king, not as a syndicate lord, but as a shadow among shadows. He did not enter the room. He did not announce himself. He waited. And waiting, he realized, was the truest measure of restraint he had ever learned. Inside, Valentina labored without complaint. Pain bent her spine. Fear clawed at her breath. But she did not call his name. She held on alone. When the child was born, the world changed quietly. A boy. Small. Pale. Breathing. Alive. Adrian closed his eyes for the first time in decades. Something ancient inside him bowed. But peace did not last. His world never allowed it. Word spread faster than it should have. Enemies noticed patterns. Shifts in territory, sudden disappearances, invisible walls forming around one woman's life. Someone followed the trail too closely. The attack was sloppy. Desperate. A last gamble. It ended before it began. By morning, the threat was erased so completely it left no echo. No retaliation. No spectacle. Justice, final and unseen. But Valentina felt it. Not fear. Clarity. She asked for him that afternoon. Not as a demand. As a choice. Adrian entered the room slowly. No guards. No titles. No aura of dominance. Just a man standing before a woman who had survived his absence. She looked tired. Pale. Stronger than he remembered. The child slept between them. You crossed my line, she said quietly. Yes, he admitted. Only when your safety left me no other choice. She studied him for a long time. You didn't try to take control, she said. No, he answered. I learned that love doesn't survive cages. Silence stretched between them. Then she spoke. He's different. Adrian felt it too. The air around the child moved differently. Ancient. Resonant. He carries royal blood, Adrian said softly. And something older. She met his gaze. I know. She told him then. Of the dreams. The language that came unbidden to her lips. The healing touch that calmed the child before any doctor could. She wasn't just surviving. She was chosen. Not by fate, but by character. I will never belong to your world, she said. Adrian nodded. Then I will reshape mine. He knelt. Not in submission. In acknowledgement. I will protect from the shadows, he said. I will never claim what does not choose me. And if one day you allow me to stand beside you, it will be as an equal, or not at all. Valentina exhaled slowly. The weight she had carried alone finally eased. You don't get redemption for power, she said. You get it for restraint. Adrian accepted that truth without argument. Years later, stories would circulate. Of a vampire king who dismantled his empire's cruelty. Of a woman who rose without demanding a throne. Of a child who united worlds without raising a fist. But those stories always forgot one thing. That it all began with a sentence spoken quietly. We don't need you. And a man who finally learned what it truly meant.